a research organization that is based in Lahore and that aims to inform policymaking through evidence-based research. The CDPR team and its researchers have undertaken the 2 studies that we will be talking about today, and this has been done under the REMIT program and funded by FCDO. The first study that we will be discussing is addressing constraints limiting the flow of private sector investments for climate change across the textile value chain. And the other study that we will be discussing is trade policy measures to encourage a shift towards green technologies. Now, we have a very interesting discussion ahead of us based on these studies, which focuses on the challenges and opportunities on Pakistan's sustainable economic growth. But before we get into this, I would like to invite Hamid Yaqub Saab, who is a seasoned civil servant, and he is, I think he requires no introduction. He's the team lead for REMIT program, and we would like him to, address everyone and set the context for today's event. Hamid Saab, over to you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. Thank you for joining today for this dissemination workshop. We're, as Arab mentioned, we're sharing findings of 2 important studies that align with the broader goal of our program, which is REMIT. Let me briefly talk about what our project is about. REMIT, which stands for Revenue Mobilization, Investment and Trade, is a FCDO funded technical assistance program to support Pakistan in implementing strategic reforms in the realm of economic development, trade, investment, and revenue mobilization. REMIT is designed to drive Pakistan's economic growth by focusing on 4 main pillars, which is revenue mobilization, investment, climate, trade competitiveness, and macroeconomic governance. And we also try to ensure that the gender, inclusion, and climate finance are cross-cutting themes are included in almost every activity that we do. Let me briefly talk about the 2 research studies that are being launched today. The first one, as you can see from the billboards here, is addressing constraints limiting flow of private sector investment for climate change across the textile value chain. And the other one is trade policy measures to encourage a shift towards green technologies. Both of these are touching upon very important areas for our country. And I hope the work which is being launched today will generate discussion on the policy actions and the implementations plan required for Pakistan's transition to green trade and investment. The study on Pakistan textile value chain, it basically looks at the 60% of Pakistan total export, which obviously are related to textile. Textile sector, as you know, contributes 8.5% to the GDP and employs almost 40% of industrial workforce. And you're also are aware that this sector faces major sustainability challenges as well, not just locally but globally as well, and requires focus on green practices as the world is moving towards greening of trade as well. So areas for investment opportunities in textile sector include cleaner technologies that reduce environmental impact, improve water and energy management in textile production, efficiencies in production methods to boost global competitiveness. The sustainability transition will happen as a result of investments that can help the sector adopt more sustainable and efficient production processes to ensure long-term growth and compliance with international environment standards. And the experts and the authors of the study are with us, and they will talk about in detail about them in a while. And the second study is on trade, green technology. We understand that trade policy adjustments are needed, including tariff and non-tariff measures to promote the import and export of green technologies. A framework for environmental services with regulatory frameworks is a must for services such as renewable energy, waste management, and water treatment to support greener growth. REMIT is supporting the government of Pakistan on developing national industrial policy. This is a separate piece of work, and we are ensuring that the learnings from these studies are also factored into the work on industrial policy. The findings of these two studies highlight key areas where Pakistan can improve both its textile sector and green technology trade policies to foster sustainable growth. By investing in greener practices and revising trade policies, we can build a more resilient and competitive economy for the future and also ensure a greener, safer, and healthier future for the earth. In the end, I want to thank CDPR for supporting us in this important work and bringing in the best expertise available, not just in the country but from abroad as well. I encourage everyone here to engage in today's discussions and explore how we can take these insights forward in practical and impactful ways. Fortunately, we have representation from across various sectors, public, private, and development sector, and I look forward to an engaging debate today. So, thank you very much for participating today, and hope to see and witness an exciting debate. Thank you very much. Before I hand back to Zara, maybe a round of introduction would be good so that people know who's in the room. Thank you.
So I'm Gulalia Khan, and I lead the Gender Inclusion and Strategic Communications agenda for REMIT.
Junaid Akhtar from REMIT.
This is Bilal Hassan. I'm Intervention Manager on the Investment Climate Works team.
Hi everyone, I'm Umair. I'm also part of the REMIT team.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex, the Program Manager for REMIT.
I work with a project, Textiles. It's a project on labor and environmental standards.
Manzoor Ahmed, I'm Trade Advisor with REMIT.
Assalamu alaikum. Waqas Musa, Head on Solar.
Assalamu alaikum. Agha Mansoor from Ministry of Commerce.
Assalamu alaikum. Zara from CDPR.
Ji, Assalamu everyone. Usman Khan, I lead the investment and climate work on REMIT, and I also teach at LUMS.
Ahmed Yaqub Sheikh, Team Leader REMIT.
I'm Reen Iftikhar. I'm Additional Secretary overseeing the reforms and policy wing at the Board of Investment.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mahmood Tufair. I am Director Reforms at Board of Investment.
Hi Guji, my name is Anis Khwaja. I am based out of Multan. I am the CEO of MG Apparel.
Good morning, I'm Bilal Anwar. I'm CEO of National Disaster Risk Management Fund.
Hi everyone, I'm Fabian Hartwell from the FCDO and I'm the Trade Advisor for the Trade Pillar of REMIT.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Mariam Raab and I'm Head of Research Programs, Research and Society in British Council.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Kekisha Osman, Chief Sustainability Officer at MG Apparel.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Dr. Imtiaz, I'm Head of Research at Ministry of Commerce.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Aisha, I'm also from REMIT.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Zareen Nair, I'm an associate with REMIT.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Adeen Saeed and I'm an associate at REMIT.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Eva Arshad and I'm also from CDPR.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Aisha Zaman, I'm also from CDPR. Online participants also introduce themselves. Can we start from Dr. Abrar?
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Lovely to meet you. I'm Abrar Chaudhary. I'm based out of University of Oxford. Can you hear me? I was having a little bit of static.
We can hear you.
But are you able to hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Lovely to meet everyone.
Yes, Sarah?
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sarah Hayat. I'm based out of Lahore and I work with Abrar on and the rest of the team, Zara and all on this report. And lovely to meet you all. Thank you.
Ahmed? So we'll come, I think there's an audio issue, so can we then start?
Okay.
So, thank you, everyone. I'll just quickly explain the format of the session. We'll kick off. So the format is we'll have a short presentation on each of the reports. So we'll start with the report on textile value chain and the impediments that are hindering investments for climate compliance within the value chain. And so, you know, textile and garments is one of the largest sector for export as well, and there is a lot of reliance of the economy on the sector. And obviously there are challenges and opportunities as well, especially with the EU Green Deal and circularity standards and other compliances coming up. There is a lot at risk, but then there is a lot of opportunity as well. So it's a fast mover advantage that open up doors for extra trade as well. However, if we're unable to move quickly, then there is obviously a risk of giving up those markets substantially. So with that context, we looked at the textile value chain across the board and looked at how or what are some of the, I mean, we talk about financing as one of the major constraints, but obviously there are other regulatory, legal, legislative and policy constraints as well that limit private sector investment within the sector despite market opportunities. So the first study actually tries to explore these and come up with policy options to address some of these constraints. So the first study was led by Dr. Abrar Chaudhry, who introduced himself. He's based at Oxford and he's a leading researcher on environmental change, climate finance and other corporate measures. So without delay, I'll ask Dr. Chaudhry to give a short presentation and then we will invite the discussants and also any questions and answers from the audience. So Dr. Abrar, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Let me share my screen and okay, just want to make sure everyone can see the screen, right? The presentation.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. And, you know, before I start, I do want to make a point. I do want to commend the REMIT team and CDPR that, you know, this is a really, really important topic to study. And as we know, you know, the textile value chain is one of the most important chains in Pakistan. So for me also personally, it was a very strong learning experience, you know, delving deeper into the value chain, but also having the opportunity to speak with many leading voices from the textile industry, from policymakers, and getting a sense of really what's happening within the value chain. So I hope that, you know, in this short presentation, I can address some of those insights that we learned, but there is a larger report. So I'd encourage everyone to, you know, spend time and learn. And as I said, you know, it's a work in process. So there's always more to add to this. So when we look at the Pakistan textile value chain, I think one thing that always comes up is that, you know, the TVC, and I'm going to call textile value chain TVC, is one of the most complex and polluting value chains in the world. But at the same time, it has an immense potential when it comes to the economy, exports, industrial growth. And for Pakistan, it promises a tremendous opportunity. We can see that already, you know, 60% of our exports are linked with the TVC. You know, it represents 8.5% of our GDP, but it is also one of the largest employers in the country. But at the same time, you know, it's a very high emission industry. You know, globally, it emits about 10% of emissions. In Pakistan, although, you know, you know, the data is a little scarce, but, you know, in some studies, it kind of shows that it's about 20% of our industrial emission. But at the same time, the TVC is also extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And when we look at Pakistan as a global player, you know, it's the 10th largest exporter in the world for textiles. And as I said, you know, it's the 10th largest exporter, but when we look at the stats, you also see that there's a huge potential for growth here. You know, we're lagging behind Bangladesh and Vietnam. And if you look at Bangladesh, you know, it has exports that's 3 times that of Pakistan. And when we start to look at China and Europe, we see that, yes, there is a huge growth potential here. At the same time, when we look at the apparel industry, we'll see a steady growth that's happening in the industry. And by 2028, the industry is expected to reach $2 trillion, with US and China generating markets around 300 billion. So when we look at Pakistani export, ranging from 10 to 15 billion dollars, we see that there is growth potential for the industry. At the same time, we're also seeing a trend, and I'll go a little bit deeper in my other slides, but what we're also seeing globally, that the global sustainable textile is growing at a faster rate. Already, when we look at the last decade, it's grown twofold. And by 2026, sustainable apparel will represent 6% of the market, and that's another 50% growth. So it is one of the fastest growing segment within the textile industry. And, with Pakistan's integrated supply chain from cotton cultivation all the way to manufacturing, it offers, again, a tremendous growth opportunity, a penetration opportunity for the textile industry to start looking and deeply considering, how do we enter the sustainable textile market? But at the same time, when we look at Pakistan's exports, sadly, it is very erratic. If you can see the graph here, you'll see years when it's done really well and only for the exports to come out. So we can see there isn't like a consistent growth. And in 2020-21, the exports grew almost 50%. But when we look at that growth, you realize that really that growth was at the back of global disruptions from COVID-19, and Pakistan was very quick to react, quick to start its industry. Hence, that growth came in. But sadly, only for that growth to drop. So we had a 15% decline in 2023, and I'm not sure what the numbers are going to be for 2024. But we've also seen a massive decline in cotton cultivation over the past decade of over 50%. And many of those elements are due to socio-economic challenges, inflation, finance cost, and climate-related issues. So the point here is, yes, there is a tremendous opportunity. The market globally is growing, but at the same time, Pakistan export is erratic, and we need to find a way of a consistent exponential growth here. When we look at the Pakistan TVC under the lens of climate change, there are many elements that come in. But before we go into that, I wanted to kind of just present this figure here, and this is just to show that in order for us to understand the economic viability and for us to understand the impacts of climate change and the emissions, we have to understand that the TVC itself is very complex and interdependent. It starts really from the fiber production, where we're talking about, producing raw material. It goes through processing, we have ginning, and then really it kind of moves into that process of spinning and textile, what we normally hear about. And then we go into production. So our focus within Pakistan is really at the production export stage. And then, of course, in the TVC, there are other elements as well, which is consumption and circular economy and disposal. We will not cover that because I think it doesn't directly relate to the production of textile products. But the purpose of showing this is to highlight that the TVC is not just textile spinning or weaving. It's a very interdependent process that starts from cotton all the way to garment manufacturing. And at the core of this sits spinning units. So if you look at Pakistan, our big advantage is that, we have over 350 plus spinning units, but they are operating, at a lower level than they can. So we have, a huge capacity availability as well if you wanted to grow this sector. When we look at climate risk, and this is just not just looking at the TVC itself, but looking at Pakistan, we all know these facts, right? That Pakistan has consistently been ranked as sadly, as one of the top 10 climate vulnerable countries, although our emission numbers are very low globally. And we've seen frequency of extreme events, droughts, floods interchanging. The 2022 floods were devastating with massive loss of life. But from an economic perspective, the World Bank has highlighted that our GDP can actually drop by 18 to 20% by 2015 because of these climatic events and pollution. So when we talk about TVC, which relies on natural resources, on cotton, you recognize that it becomes extremely vulnerable. So for us to have a robust climate resilient TVC becomes extremely important. But the global trend is also changing. It's not just about Pakistan. When we did some research and we spoke to global retailers, what's really coming out is that the demand for sustainability is rising. Many of the leading brands, H&M, Zara, have all put their commitments of achieving net zero. And when I say net zero, really it means that they want to buy low emission products. They want to understand, what those emissions are. And this is just two retailers. If you look at the fashion companies surveyed, nearly 40% are now planning on tracking their emissions because that's something that's coming up. On the other side, we're seeing a rise in sustainability reporting standards. So, very soon, these sustainability standard 1, 2 are being adopted globally. They're also going to be adopted in Pakistan. We're also seeing like Europe coming up with really intense and very detailed emission reporting requirements, which means that any product that's being exported into Europe will need to now show its emissions through this CBAM, which is this carbon adjustment border taxes. So what we're really seeing is this trend of sustainability being demanded, but it's supplemented with strict and emerging regulations, laws, and standards. So when we look at the emissions within the TVC, I think it's really important, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but when we look at emission, it's important to think of direct emissions and value chain emissions, what we call scope 1, 2, and 3. Our direct emissions are really when emissions that are from production or from running our mills, but the more important ones are the value chain emissions. So in order for us to calculate a footprint of our, for example, a t-shirt or a garment, we really need to calculate emissions all the way from cotton production, transportation, manufacturing, to export of that product. And that's our total emission footprint. And in Pakistan, again, I would say this is where we need a lot more studies. But the few studies we were able to identify represent that, textile production, which does not include cotton or transportation, roughly accounts for 9% of the total Pakistani emissions and 20% of the industrial emission. But when we add cotton and other elements, I'm sure this number will go up. Why is this number important? Because this is the number that's actually demanded by global retailers. So when they're buying a product from Pakistan, they want to understand what is the total emission of this product, which means emission all the way from cotton to your export. Because this emission then becomes a number in their supply chain. And for them to report their supply chain, they need to understand what the emission is coming from all across. So it's making Pakistan even more interdependent on the global supply chain. And if we want to continue supplying, and especially if we want to demonstrate sustainability and resilience, we have to start showing that we have to start calculating accurate data and then giving that data to our global retailers. This is a busy slide, but I wanted to show that the TVC is a very energy intense sector. And you can see the red element where we kind of map that in every process from cotton farming all the way to distribution, we use fuel, we use energy. And so it's a very high emission hotspot industry. And for us to accurately understand what's happening, we need to calculate emissions at each and every level and then accumulate those emissions to understand what is happening. And only when we understand what the hotspots are accurately can we start to take corrective policy and investment measure. But it also offers a tremendous opportunity, because the moment you start to see figures like these, you can start to identify, actually, I can go in my finished product and find a way to reduce my fuel consumption. Or how do I start to build a low emission transportation sector? Because, that's a sector that's actually shipping products all across, from your cotton all the way to your exports, and that transportation happens all the time. So if we were to actually focus on transportation just as a sector, we would start to reduce our emission, but it also offers an investment opportunity. So it's really important to understand a breakdown of all these emissions. If we deep down a little bit more, and again, I say that, we need more studies here, but with the information we found out, spinning is your most highly emitting sector. And of course, because it's very energy intensive, we have some colleagues from the textile industry, and they can say, the moment you walk into a textile spinning mill, you can feel the heat, you can feel the noise, so you know how much energy is actually being used. So the question is, how do we start to reduce those emissions, and what are some of the ways of moving towards more energy efficient machinery, but also thinking about our energy mix. Where is that energy actually coming from? Many of the textile mills have put on their own renewable energy, but largely when we look at the Pakistani energy mix, if we take energy from the grid, only 5% of the energy is actually coming from renewable. And that figure is going up, but that shows that every time you plug in a textile to the grid, your emission number will be higher. Along with emissions, I think we also have to recognize that we often don't prioritize that the textile sector is also a very high-risk climate sector, which means it's not just about what it's emitting, but what is the impact of climate on the textile value chain. And we can start with cotton because that's the core raw material. That's what makes our textile value chain important in the world. And when we look at the analysis of cotton production, sadly, we saw that there's been a 50% drop in cotton production over this last decade. And I was just reading in the news that the current numbers that are coming in are also not very promising. And I'm not saying that this is only because of climate change. There are lots of socioeconomic challenges, but climate is one of the key factors that, cotton is a sensitive growing plant. We've had extreme events, we've had extreme rainfalls, so it has been disrupting. Even when we look at the manufacturing, we realize that, yes, textiles use a lot of water. You can see the dyeing plants. So we have to think about pollution in terms of water, but also think about that, in most places in summers, our temperatures are over 40 to 50 degrees. So what about working conditions for people working not just in the field, but working in the factories? You have to start cooling those factories now. That's also rising those emissions, but it also creates very hazardous conditions for people working there. And then, of course, transportation. The biggest threat in textile value chain nationally and globally are supply chain disruptions. So the moment you have floods, your roads stop, or your transportation sector stops, or your shipping sector stops, we've seen that the price go up and there are massive delays. So we really have to think about the impact of extreme events on our transportation sector as well. So what can the private sector do? And this is where we really started to go in, talk to lots of actors, talk to lots of textile mills from small to large. We spoke to APTMA, we spoke to many of the trade associations as well. And I think it's important to understand who are the key actors in the TVC. We always think about textile manufacturers, but we have to recognize there are many actors in matrix. And of course, we see that, large textile, global retailers, trade organizations are always have a high interest and high influence in the textile value chain. And we can see that through the success of these large textile mills. They've done tremendously well in terms of their investments, in terms of their numbers, despite many of those challenges. So you see that they have a lot of stake in the sector. But on the other side, we have these small and medium textile mills as well. And our conversation when we talk about sustainability is that they have lower interest and have very little influence. They're the ones who are struggling. So the question is, how do we start to bring these small and medium textiles in that quadrant? And part of it is that the responsibility also lies with all these different actors. When we look at cotton farmers, they have extremely high interest in what's happening on climate and textile, but they have very little influence. And we've seen that, time and time again, a lot of, when we spoke to farmers, especially cotton farmers, many of them were, transitioning into other crops because they felt that they did not get the due attention, the due support. So they were happy to produce potatoes, for example. And that really disrupts the textile industry. So how do we start to create more influence for these farmers or for the traders and for the NGOs? And then finally, from a government and a funder perspective, they have huge influence, right? We have, policymakers sitting here, we have funders sitting here, and they have huge influence. So how do we start to increase their interest in this sector? And I think activities like these really help. But I also empathize because government has to prioritize many other sectors as well. But because this sector is so important, it has the potential to generate exports, but its disruption can actually have a direct impact in the economy. We have to see how do we look at and move these actors towards that quadrant. The next step we really did was look at some of the barriers in the private sector. And of course, you speak to anyone in the textile sector, they can identify many of those barriers. But just to quickly go over those barriers, I'm not going to spend a lot of our time, which is inhibiting private sector investment, is that, yes, we're seeing that there's low renewable investments. Although textile mills were very keen that they wanted to, especially the larger ones, that they wanted to expand their footprint investments in renewable, but there are policy constraints, there's space constraints, there are also this high cost of interest. Transferring your machinery into energy efficient machinery requires investments, and not every textile mill is willing to do that. But we can see that. Of course, we have high energy costs, we have high interest cost. When we look at cotton cultivation, it's very complex, right? The practices on ground are challenging. There's extreme weather events, there are pests, which is really leading to low cotton yields. So our cotton yield has been dropping substantially compared to other countries. There's one thing we noticed a lot was that there's very limited cross-learning. While the associations or the larger textile mills had a lot of knowledge, often that knowledge doesn't transfer into smaller mills. So how do we, and efforts become fragmented. So how do we build all this cross-learning across the industry as well? And then, of course, lots of policies, but often weak environmental enforcement. So, textiles have varying degrees of compliance. Some do extremely well, and they were very proud to show us their compliance. Others did not speak much about it. So you can start to see that. And then finally, it's about this whole element that came up again and again, which is this lack of green premium. Where, many textiles called it, price neutral, that currently global buyers are not willing to pay a premium for sustainable products. And so the costs are really passed on to the textile industry, which have to make those investments. Yes, in the long run, it will have a beneficial impact. It's very important to maintain your market share, even grow your market share. But in the interim, we can't expect that if you supply sustainable products, you will get a premium. But that market is changing slowly as well. But it gives us a big first mover advantage as well. When we look at opportunities, and again, when we identify these opportunities, we actually wanted to see what is actually happening in the industry right now. So these are not suggestions that are not happening. These are not suggestions that are outside or other countries are doing. There are many of these interventions are already happening, which gives us this positive approach that if one textile can do it, why can't other textiles do it? We're seeing in terms of opportunity, there's a massive opportunity in investment in sustainable materials, right? Of course, the world is demanding sustainable, renewable materials, and we sit at the core of that. We are, one of the largest cotton producers in the world, so we have that access. But there's also innovation that's happening in other forms of material or in recycling. Many textile mills identified that their waste has now become their prime product, and so they're making products out of waste because that's being demanded. There's a massive opportunity in renewable. We know our energy costs are high, and many of those textiles showed us very proudly their renewable. Their limitation was that we don't have any space, but we're also seeing investments coming in battery storage, and I think that's something that can push the industry further. Opportunity in sustainable chemicals, water recycling interventions. Many textiles were doing that. We saw a little bit on transportation. I think that's an area that often kind of sits outside the textile value chain because we rely on external contractors for transportation. But I think it's a really, really important area to think about how do we build a renewable fleet of textile that's happening across the world. Global industry collaboration, lots of textiles participate in fairs, but are also working very closely with their retailers. And I think that's the model we have to work towards. That if we want to be a leading sustainable supplier, we no longer service providers, we're actually partners for them. And I think we're actually solving someone else's problem. So, these global retailers are now working closely with these factories. And then one big area of opportunity is monitoring and reporting. Every large textile retailer wants traceability. It wants to know where its product came from, not just from a climate perspective, from human rights perspective, from slavery perspective. If you look at the European laws, they're becoming extremely strict on slavery. And many textiles, global retailers have been penalized for products that are not traceable. So having technology solutions that offer monitoring, traceability is something that can be extremely vital for our industry, but these solutions can also be given to the rest of the world. And some of the leading textiles were already doing this traceability. But I think if those efforts are collated, then the entire industry can benefit, and actually they can be a cost reduction as well. Just 2 points here. When we look at the financing needs for Pakistan, right? We always talk about climate finance. World Bank estimate says we need 348 billion. 44% for adaptation, things like climate smart agriculture to protect our cotton, 56% for decarbonization, reducing emissions of our factory. Well, Pakistan was only able to get $4 billion. Just 7 projects from the Green Climate Fund. So the trend is going up, but I think the gap is huge. We need to scale our financing. On the other hand, we did some analysis of funding in textile, and we saw a very interesting example where Bangladesh was able to secure $250 million from the Green Climate Fund to decarbonize its textile sector. So there are examples of global finance available specifically for the textile sector. And, in the report, we've given many examples, but you can see Bangladesh, South Africa getting money, global finance money for decarbonizing the textile sector. One point here is often these funders do not focus on single industry. So if a large textile went and wanted to get climate finance from these multilateral, that would not happen. But if it transforms the industry, if it transforms the sector, if it decarbonizes the country, then it's a very, very attractive opportunity. And so I feel the association needs to play a bigger role here. I'm not going to law. My colleague Sarah is here who spent many, many, many days and a lot of hard work in looking at the various laws and policies. And I think our conclusion was laws are there, policies are there. We're very good at crafting policies. Our challenge is in implementation. how do we adopt those laws? How do we enforce those laws? So it's not the number of laws. And thank you, Sarah, for, putting in that work. And there's a lot of detailed section on laws. So you can go in the report and see the various laws. So what do we recommend? I know I want to finish quickly. What is our recommendation here? And, sadly, there is no silver bullet, right? We know this already, that when it's climate change, when it's textile, when it's one of the most complex value chain, there isn't one single solution. We have to take a systems approach. And when I say a systems approach, I know it seems, we need to change the system, because we cannot succeed if the system within which we operate is not aligned. And what's really important in leveraging a systems approach is that collectively, we have to develop a TVC outcomes. Like right now, if you speak to the industry, if you speak to policymakers, if you speak to funders, what is the goal of the textile value chain? They will all give you different answers. Some might say, I want to increase my export. Some might say, we want to make it more resilient. We want employment. So we have to have very, very clear outcomes. What is the economic outcome? What is the environmental outcome? How do we develop supply chain transparency and traceability? How do we look at circularity and recycling? These are things that are being demanded. So we have to have those outcomes, but we also have to understand very clearly what are the drivers. Climate is one of the drivers. There's consumer demands, there's labor shortages. If we want green sustainability, we need to have green jobs. People need to understand how to produce and recycle material. When we have farmers working on the ground, we need to understand how do we ensure that the traceability is there, because the cotton that's produced, if it's high emission, it impacts the entire value chain. So how do we ensure that we are measuring? And there are initiatives that are already out there doing this. And then finally, we have to take all the actors together, because it's not just the large textile manufacturers. As I showed, there's a whole range of actors, from producers to processors to packagers to retailers, support services, right? From logistics, finance, technology, they all have to contribute, because all of their work actually contributes to the emission. So we need to make sure that if we want to produce low emission, high resilient products, everyone needs to be contributing within that system. What are the 3 recommended actions? Well, our first recommended action is, while I don't encourage creating a new institution, I think in this case, we need a multi-stakeholder collaboration. We need a innovation TVC public-private sector partnership, PPP. And the reason why I say PPP is because policy and private sector go hand in hand here. We need that enabling environment. We need that credibility. We need that funding. So we need an entity that's actually looking after the entire textile value chain, not just APTMA looking after certain sector, or the Pakistan Textile Council looking at. We want it to be a complete approach, which is really what is this TVC PPP doing? It's aligning all the stakeholders. It's doing what we're doing right now. It's learning from other business model stakeholders. For example, the Bangladesh Accord, I know that the Pakistan Accord is also coming here. They're not focused on sustainability. They're more focused on human rights, but those are models. But it's also setting and setting all the outcomes. The second aspect is we have to secure climate finance. Yes, we need internal funding, but there is a massive opportunity outside. Climate finance is going up. So how do we ensure we get funding? And the funding will only come when we show the entire textile value chain, when we show that the investments that we're making in climate smart agriculture is not just beneficial for the farmers, it's actually related to trade. So anything, a dollar spent there is going to translate into multiple sustainable dollars for your products. And we have to have targeted funding scheme that look at smallholders, SMEs, but also how do we start to redirect subsidies from agriculture towards sustainable practices. And then finally, the third principle is experiment and innovation. There is a lot of opportunity for Pakistan to set itself as an innovator, right? We sit on the textile value chain. we can develop new data metrics, we can develop new materials, and already mills are doing that. Already factories are doing that. We can be focusing on climate tech, climate agri startups that are really plugging into the textile value chain. So there is a huge room for experimentation and innovation that the TVC/PP can play to generate. Just two last slides very quickly. What can private sector do here? Well, private sector, other than their investments, I'm not going into individual investments. I'm now thinking about the system. What can the private sector do? Well, by investing in green technologies, they're actually proving the case. The moment we have investment in solar, every textile mill can now invest because it knows that this technology is viable. It's actually giving return. So really we need to back and de-risk the sector. We need to navigate the value chain that our private sector can start to invest in startups. It can raise funds. It can adopt sustainable practices. The moment one factory adopts sustainable practices, other factories will also do that. The moment you start to invest, you start to crowd in investors. Any investor that we know will never come in if there is no skin in the game. So the moment the private sector says, okay, I'm going to put in my money, 30%, 40%, I need 50% more investment or 60% more investment. So you bring in different diverse investors, right? Whether it's multilateral, whether it's private sector, whether it's local bank, whether it's venture capital. But that's what private sector can do. It can create talent. We need talent. And sustainable jobs are the fastest growing sector in the world right now. ILO has estimated that about 100 million jobs are required. And that goes from green farming to energy efficient engineers, to water conservation, to material scientists. And I think that's where private sector can play. And then finally, it can connect different stakeholders, right? It sits in that chain where large private sector mills have the power to convene. So, they can talk to farmers. So I think that convening is really important. What are the actions that the governments can take? Well, of course, we need a long-term industrial policy that's backed by sustainability. Like sustainability has to be a big principle. We have to align green policies. We see so many different policies from provincial to national. How do we align them? We need incentives, we need subsidies, we need to scale and support practices. A few years ago, I did some work on climate smart agriculture. And the idea was there's a lot of work that's already happening on ground. How do we scale it? But how do we stop bad practices as well? Access to global finance, massive opportunity in traceability and sustainability. This is what the world wants. The government could be setting its own sustainability standards so that the standards that each retailer offers are aligned. Instead of H&M coming to the industry and saying, this is our standard, we can say, we already have our standards. They're all aligned. All the factories, all the industry, all the TVC is working around it. I think the government can play an instrumental role in promoting TVC globally through our embassies, through our trade organization. We have access in each and every country. I think we need to start promoting that Pakistan is a sustainable hub for textile. And I think that promotion needs to happen very actively. And then finally, establish textile clusters. I went to a textile cluster. There are textile clusters already, but to be honest, they're just spaces. I think there's so much more that we can do with our clusters in terms of having, centralized energy production or clean transportation within that cluster or traceability within that cluster or getting all these different value chain actors within that cluster. It will really help for the buyer because it can see a product go in within the cluster and a product come out and then everything can be traceable, measured, low emission. So in conclusion, my push after this study, and to be honest, after this study, I've been saying this a lot to many other countries as well. Pakistan has to think about what is Pakistan's comparative advantage, right? What do we stand? Our textile value chain is one of the key value chains. It's, as I said, 60% of the market. I think Pakistan needs to declare itself as a global leader in sustainable textile. It needs to rebrand TVC to Sustainable Pakistan. And the reason is why? Because when we speak to global retailers, we say, why do you want to come to Pakistan? Why is Pakistan important? They said, because Pakistan has end-to-end product. We can go to one single country and we can get cotton to a t-shirt. If we go to other countries, we have to do this traceability through different geographies, and it doesn't help us. So think of the advantage that we're sitting on. We need to, of course, address all these different challenges, but they can be addressed. These are not, as I said, showstoppers. We need to take a systems approach. The moment we take a systems approach, we will understand, we will align ourselves to a single goal. And then finally, we need to form an innovation authority, because a lot of the work is not about something new. It's about connecting the dots. It's about finding gaps that already exist in the TVC and filling those gaps, because we can see large textiles going all the way to cotton production and with success. So if one industry can do that, why cannot this be replicated across the country? Thank you so much for your time, and happy to start the discussion. I hope I didn't take too much time, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Brar. I know it's always a challenge to present a 100-page report in a very short time and on slides, because each page has very lengthy analysis and some results coming out of it. But we'll start with some of our key discussants and then we'll open for questions. So first I'll request Madam Madam Ambreen Iftikhar for her remarks on the presentation and reflections.
Thank you very much, Usman. First of all, I must commend the presenter. That was an excellent presentation. Covered rather it covered everything. So I really am at a loss as to what to add to what has already been said. Nevertheless, I will give a few comments. Speaking from the perspective of the government, since I myself am engaged in reform work, and we are working very closely at the Board of Investment with REMIT, Hamid and Usman and the others. So I would tend to agree that the textile value chain is extremely important for Pakistan, considering that this is one of the sectors for which Pakistan is known. And as has already been mentioned, we have end-to-end solutions when it comes to textiles. Having said that, we also know that there are many challenges, although I think that a lot of good work is being done by the private sector. The government, I think, needs to do more with regard to providing a platform, a multi-stakeholder platform, where all the stakeholders can come together, and by that I mean the private sector, our development partners, the banks, the financing institutions, everyone to find solutions. Ultimately, I think the end goal, the one vision that we need to have in every sector is the one word: sustainability. It's sustainability that we have to move towards. That is where the world is heading. So everything that we do has to be aligned with the ultimate goal of ensuring that it is sustainable, it's good for the people, it's good for the planet, it's good for our future. I think that the textile sector can be taken as a sort of a pilot project, let's say, for the government and for the rest of the stakeholders, whereby we can get together and, using the recommendations of this report, see how we can converge to create solutions, and how the government can make changes in regulations, and how we can create synergies across the board to ensure that we come up with viable solutions whereby we create jobs for our people. We ensure that women are well represented in this sector across the entire value chain. And also, the quality standards, the transparency that has been talked about, and what we can learn from whatever global practices are happening across the globe. Mapping of this sector is, of course, the first requirement, and then there would be redundant regulations that have to be done away with, specifically for this sector, as is the case in all other sectors. So we do away with the redundant regulations, and of course, we understand that there are new regulations coming in. The idea of a new authority being established or a new agency, well, it does make sense, but I do feel that that is not really viable because for every sector there are issues. So rather than going for that, I would just think that we try through innovation in the textile sector, taking it as an experiment of sorts, to try to ensure that there is cohesion, there is harmony in all the policies that impact this sector. And the government, of course, has to work very closely and provide that ecosystem, a new ecosystem, and the enabling environment to ensure that the private sector is facilitated and our textile industry is facilitated in ensuring that we reach the goal of sustainability. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Madam Breen, for making those reflections. Next, I'll request Anis Khwaja. He's the CEO of MG Apparel and one of the active companies in the sector taking this leap. So, Anis, your reflections, and if you could also highlight a couple of things that you think government should take up from a policy and a regulation side as well, which would really fast track some of the things that you're trying to do.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Usman, for this opportunity as well. Very happy to be a part of this discussion here. And let me just start off by adding on to the comments by Dr. Bar and Breen as well. I think the first onus on us as a company is what Dr. Brar said, that we as a company are doing so much, but I think that linkage where we need to probably share our experiences more with people who are not doing enough is missing. And this is an important takeaway that at least we are getting as a company today from this, because when we were going through the presentation which Dr. Brar was sharing as well, and I mean, of course, credit goes to our team here. We've done almost everything which is there, and because we as a group start from cotton growing, we go into ginning, we go into spinning, we go into weaving and garment manufacturing as well. So absolutely spot on that businesses like spinning in the textile value chain are probably not taken up enough for the reason that the brands do not come in that strong with them. But as a group, our philosophy has been that this is not something we're doing because the brands are asking us to do it. We want to do it because we feel this is right. And use this terminology of having a world with sustainable human beings. That's where our motive starts and changes. So that's why we started with this MG Apparel project as a LEED certified platinum. 5,000 people working in this particular one company to keep sustainability as a lead. It has automatically been a part of our culture right from day one, and that's a big blessing, I would feel. And I think the elements of solar or treatment of water and reusing of water, and even for us personally, the usage of all the steam that we're able to get out of our gen sets that we use, is probably now something we need to move forward from. This is something which is a part of the industry, which can be a very quick element which anybody can take up right now and be a part of it. As a group, we have 30 megawatts of solar, and in some of our facilities, we do not consume any electricity at all because of the solar production that we're able to get. So my humble request to the industry and the linkages that we have to create is that this is not something very complicated anymore. This is something very basic for us, and this needs to be done because this is the right way to do it, and it is not just a win for the environment but for us as well. So to the next part of your question and how the governance part can be improved in that, I feel some of the elements which had always been a reason for us to start off is that there was a bit of a carrot and stick model going on, that the state bank and the government policies were always there to support getting greener. And I still know for a fact when I engage with organizations like British Investment, IFC, and everybody, and JIS, of course, we feel that they still see the need of it, but understanding the IMF program that we are going through, I feel that the government needs to present our case differently, because this is frankly different than just a normal development or a normal business growth that we are talking about. So this cannot be mired by a large-scale manufacturing industrial growth. This is different. So it still needs that special incentive there. And some of the elements which one of our panels from Pakistan Textile Council was there at WTO as well. I was supposed to be there, but I couldn't join in. That we feel that sitting in Pakistan, we sometimes have to make a lot of effort in understanding where the world is going to next, because sustainability is a journey which keeps going on. And we're really, I think, short of resources or the knowledge transformation. The fact that we're short of technical knowledge and the way step forward that we can take to improve ourselves in the sustainability journey is missing. That is somewhere we need the government's help, and more importantly, the international partners who are always around. So we are very blessed to be working with GIZ in a very close collaboration. We are in touch with IFC as well. But I think at a scale which we are trying to achieve with this talk today, the dialogue today is very important. And lastly, I feel that again that we talk about exports, we talk about growth, we talk about employments, but we never talk about how the government is gonna support or recognize or appreciate the people who are doing a better job in sustainability as well. It's not a myth, it's measurable, it's quantifiable as well. So if this has to be done, it can be done very quickly, but it will only help and encourage many more to be a part of this journey. Because unfortunately still, for a lot of people, especially in the textile sector, it's more of a gimmick to sell yourself better to the brands. So we need to change that narrative, and we need to bring in that appreciation as well. I don't know, Keksha, if you want to add something, if I missed something.
Yeah, I think just to also we have to realize that I know we have done a lot in getting the net targets from SBTi, but these all forms and calculation tools are very focused as per the international standards. We need to have our own standards as well, region specific, because that requires lots of understanding of calculating everything. And besides the net submission is there, we also have to assess and make the targets achieved as well by the 2032. And it is going to be very hard because obviously scope 3 is very much there, and that understanding is obviously need to be shared with everyone within the Pakistan textile community. So yes, that is there, and yes, just will add that we really need to have more startups. Like we are planning to invest in Aya, so we need to have more startups which are helping in bridging the gap of calculating everything and getting there to the agenda.
So Aya is a startup which is helping in calculation of ESGs. So we as a company are investing in it as well because we feel we want to support such elements that are coming around. And just something again, I feel the industry needs help is what the EU regulations that we are coming across. So again, as a company, we feel we are much more prepared, but as an industry, we're probably blank. And now we have some coming out of US as well.
Thank you, Nis, on raising some of the very good points, especially on the standards. I think that's really critical because unless we start to localize those, I think when you compare MG with the other sector, you've already taken the lead, so you have a lot of advantage in terms of meeting those from an international benchmark. But I think in terms of expanding that to the entire sector, we really need the local capabilities. And I think on startups, not just on the measurement and reporting on the ESG, but also a lot of other startups need to be encouraged, especially on waste recycling, energy solutions, other, as Abrar mentioned, on transportation. Maybe there could be some startups that are for the sector. The battery backup system. So I think we really need to engage with NICs as well, and slightly move away from just looking at technology startups to sustainability startups, because I think there's a better way to sort of or more value on that. And on the EU regulations as well, I think that's very critical. So I recently did some work on that, and as you know, I think almost on a weekly basis there are some changes that are coming, and it's really sort of in a flux. And even the EU head of delegation here calls a tsunami of regulations on sustainability that is coming up. We're trying to work on a tool I'll share with you as well, a free registration for that, where we're trying to set up an AI tool on the EU database of regulations. So in that way, what you will be able to do is to really query the database to really see what affects your sector, rather than going to a specific law and then reading it and understanding it. What we're trying to do is to do a more query-based response based on the EU database regulation, because I think that's a major step. But thank you for your points. Next, quickly, I'll ask Dr. Nabil from Ministry of Commerce, who heads the compliance, his remarks, especially on sort of these standards and how the compliance center can really support in meeting in helping the sector.
Thank you very much. As far as the standards are concerned, we are in a position to set up a National Compliance Center. I've recently joined Ministry of Commerce, and my background is also textiles and all that. First of all, we'll be going to set up the structure, and we're trying to focus on textiles first and one or two other sectors, and then we'll move on to some other sectors in phase 2 and then phase 3. So as far as the standards are concerned, first we have to benchmark what are the international standards are for sustainability, for testing till the product level, and some of them there for the policy level. So, and afterwards, having all said that, we'll be working with associations like FTMA, Pregnia, PHMA, and all those. And we've had 1 or 2 meetings with them already. So we're going to set up different localized kind of regional standards so that we can have, even for the products, so that we can have more focused kind of standardization for our country, and to like what Bangladesh have done, like India has done, and because the product standards and the policy standards, they change with the value chain when it comes into different kind of fibers being dealt in the textiles. And for example, for synthetics, we are far away. One of my points here for the textile sectors would be that to bring up SMEs, we need to build, like government can do, is we can build product development centers, sustainable product development centers, cluster-based, and people who cannot, spend more on the product development, they can just go to that on subsidized rates, and you can evaluate that, and that would have more impact to develop this sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nabil. I'll also request now online Ahmed Shafi Saab, CEO, Crescent Textile Mills, for his remarks and views, sir. If you can have.
Assalamu alaikum. I was unable to completely understand the conversation happening at your end. मेरे ख्याल से कोई sound का issue है. But I saw the presentation from Abrar and I understood some parts, and I've read the report as well. A very comprehensive study of, and probably the first I have read, which gives a roadmap of where we should be heading and how to handle this situation in a hybrid model. And I know you have Anis Khwaja Saab sitting with you over there, and it's nice to have dynamic and forward-looking, young, talented people who are contributing to this cause. We need more people like Anis to contribute. And मेरे ख्याल से इस तरह के challenges तो तकरीबन हर मुल्क में हैं. हमें देखना ये है कि हम इसके अंदर इसको पॉजिटिव स्पिन कैसे दे सकते हैं. एंड जितने ज्यादा लोग इसके अंदर इन्वॉल्व होंगे तो वो एक मोमेंटम बनेगी एंड वी विल इवेंचुअली गेट सम रिजल्ट्स. इसके अंदर ब्रांडिंग का एस्पेक्ट जो है एंड पॉजिटिविटी का जो एस्पेक्ट है वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि ये सिर्फ सप्लायर एंड पे नहीं है कि हम यहाँ पर अपने आप को और पाकिस्तान में कैसे ठीक करते हैं और एडहेयर करते हैं और इस इकोसिस्टम को प्रमोट करते हैं जहां पर इन्वेस्टमेंट इनटू सस्टेनेबिलिटी आए. हमें अपने जो पार्टनर्स हैं अब्रॉड उनको एंगेज करना है एक्टिवली, उनको पहले एजुकेट करना है थ्रू वेरियस ब्रांडिंग मेथड्स एंड कम्युनिकेशन चैनल्स, mostly online. And if you look at Anis's project, MG Apparel, they do a wonderful job online, जहां वो लोगों को बताते हैं कि कैसे हम we are a different breed altogether, जो अब आइंदा apparel and home and value added segments में आ रहे हैं. वैसे तो जो yarn spinners भी हैं बहुत सारे जो कि हट के काम कर रहे हैं और रेगुलर प्रोडक्ट नहीं कर रहे. अच्छा, वैसे रेगुलर प्रोडक्ट भी यहाँ पर पाकिस्तान में बड़ा अच्छा बनता है, जिससे फिर बहुत सारे लोग जो यहाँ लोकली मेड प्रोडक्ट्स हैं, ब्रांड्स हैं, वो फायदा लेते हैं. ठीक है, बहुत इंपोर्ट भी हो रहा है एंड अगेन इट ऑल डिपेंड्स ऑन द इकोनॉमिक्स कि जहाँ सस्ता होगा वहीं से आएगा, जहाँ से मीनिंगफुल होगा वहीं से आएगा. एंड आई थिंक दैट्स अ चॉइस एवरीबडी हैज एंड यू कांट कंट्रोल दिस राइट नाउ. अब वो जमाने नहीं रहे कि आप कुछ ऐसे ट्रेड के ऊपर लगाएं चेक्स एंड बैलेंसेस के, बिकॉज मनी फ्लो वहीं होना है. तो इसीलिए पाकिस्तान की भी जो ट्रांजिशन है ये भी इकोनॉमिक्स पे डिपेंड करेगी बहुत सारी, कि कैसे कहाँ पर फायदा जिसको होगा वो इसके साथ पार्ट एंड पार्सल बनेगा एंड देन वी विल मूव फॉरवर्ड विद दैट. तो बहुत सारी ऑलरेडी इन्वेस्टमेंट हुई भी है. मैं कहीं पढ़ रहा था रिपोर्ट के अंदर 400 के करीब बिलियन डॉलर्स की रिक्वायरमेंट है पाकिस्तान को टू मेक इट हैपन. ये ठीक है, एक ड्रीम होनी चाहिए, मगर इट विल टेक अ लॉन्ग टाइम. एंड पहले तो हमें देखना चाहिए हम कहाँ खड़े हुए हैं और जो अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं उनकी प्रोजेक्शन एट द राइट फॉरम्स बहुत जरूरी है. एंड उसको फिर मल्टीप्लायर इफेक्ट एक देना है बाय एडिंग मोर पीपल टू दिस कॉज. तो मैं स्पेसिफिक्स में नहीं गया, मैं थोड़ा जरा जनरल गुफ्तगू किया. आई होप आई वाज एबल टू मेक सेंस.
Thank you, Shafi Saab. I think the key takeaway from that is, I think, creating this awareness by looking at some of the benchmark success cases, because I think, as the report also adequately highlights, that generally the sector would see this as a cost and the benefit is not really eminently clear at the start. So I think where the benefits have been realized, I think those are some good stories that could really convince people to make that investment, so that it's both socially and economically a positive NPV transaction. Before I open up for general questions, one quick remark from Abdul Rauf Sahab from GIZ, because I know you're leading a project on textiles, and you probably meet a more variety of firms. So based on your experience of engaging in the field, what are some of the gaps that you see in terms of moving forward on this area?
Thank you very much. Yes, from my project's perspective, we are meeting different stakeholders. We are talking to the industry, specifically companies directly, and then on the policy side. So when we go to the companies, as Anis Khwaja Sahab also mentioned, that there is a quick changes and a quick flow of policies coming from Europe. So how to translate them into easily understandable manner, that what one policy means to the government, what exactly means for the government, and what that policy means for the company. So translating, making them easily understandable and quantifying them. Thank you very much. Yes, from my project's perspective, we are meeting different stakeholders. We are talking to the industry, specifically companies directly, and then on the policy side. So when we go to the companies, as Anis Khwaja Sahab also mentioned, that there is a quick changes and a quick flow of policies coming from Europe. So how to translate them into easily understandable manner, that what one policy means to the government, what exactly means for the government, and what that policy means for the company. So translating, making them easily understandable and quantifying them. That, for example, in financial terms, how they are translating for the companies and for the ministry, for example, Ministry of Commerce, how it is translating for them, that what sort of new policy relevant ministries are to develop. So, the policy gap as well as the financial translation. So these kind of general understanding people used to share with us. Yeah.
I would just want to give credit to GIZ again. I think one of the most important thing that they've done is that, for example, Kehkashan herself went through the journey of scope 1, 2, 3. And I think why GIZ's model is becoming very successful for us as the textile industry is because they're able to train a lot of people. They're not just a talk that come, listen to us and go. They're actually focusing on giving trainings. And like, for example, they've got one now coming in Multan as well. So probably that's a model that needs to be scaled as well.
Just adding to that, one major gap which we as just highlighted, that we have a methodology called Dialogue for Sustainability. That sustainability, achieving some roadmap or achieving some target is just not the job of the owner. So this is something should be shared across the board, across on the production floors. So this sort of sentiment, this sort of training helps all the actors to understand and ally themselves with that. So that is something we are doing there also.
And I totally agree. I was just putting a presentation for Ministry of Industries yesterday on various multipliers, and still looking at all the policy variables, the returns to investment in human capital is still by far the largest. It's about 3 times for 1% increase in an index of human capital. When we talk about these specialized areas, I think the return is substantially positive, and that probably the change would happen on that. So before we move on to the next presentation, I'd open up if there are any comments from other participants or questions. Ji, Dr. Imtiaz.
Okay, very interesting presentation. I would I would just comment on the EU regulations and that we usually focus on, but there's less discussion on voluntary standards, voluntary sustainability standards. So when it comes to competitiveness and exports, we need to understand that these voluntary standards are becoming kind of industry standards, and these standards are usually market specific, product specific, and sometimes process specific as well. So when we talk about competitiveness, we need to talk more about these standards and maybe support SMEs, especially because there are a lot of firms, especially SMEs, that they have funds issues. They know less about the market standards, so we need to have more discussion on this side as well.
Perhaps to the point Dr. Saab mentioned, I mean, overall the presentations were quite interesting, and obviously there's a lot of opportunity to do work. But I think there was a theme which was coming out, and which I just want to sort of bring out further. Showing अक्सर मेरा काम सोलर का है, so there's frequently this question of I tell my salespersons that Pakistan is too poor to afford the luxury of going green. We install solar because it makes financial sense. We install solar agriculture, residential, wherever it is, it makes financial sense. So I think like the kind of examples which you have, and I think you mentioned it, that some of the other players in the industry, especially when you go back in the value chain, as we said in the presentation, that the TVC, the textile value chain, has a lot of segments. There's the front-facing ones who are dealing with Zara and H&M and all those, and you guys are getting the brunt. And obviously, you guys are facing the EU regulations up front. But there's a lot of people in the lower part of the value chain who are not facing it directly. But in the future, they will. However, we need to give them some examples and sort of, build their confidence from your success stories, obviously the success stories of the leaders of the industry, on how it makes financial sense for them. And that's how we need to get them to sort of voluntarily comply on this. And there was this also very interesting concept of, branding ourselves as the sustainable textile industry experts in the world. So that's something which will only come when there's a buy-in. Subsidies and regulations can do so much. But eventually, what happens is that it's the decision making happening at the bottom end, which was going to make an impact. So that's something which I felt was a very good theme, and I think this is something we should work on.
Again, as a private entity, and what we can do in this is that we came up with a program to support our supply chain. So that's where the SME sector comes in. We had an organization who pledged with us that they will be doing the funding for it, and we will be the eyes and ears in identifying what needs to be done where, educate the SME as well as help them as well. Unfortunately, they couldn't keep up with their promise, but this is something which can be there with different international organizations as well, that industries or companies like us who have a larger footprint can create this insight into the supply chain as well for SME sectors.
Some things have already been responded to anyway. It's very encouraging to hear what you say, how and saying that it's not that difficult. I mean, it must have, now that you have gone through this process. But I was wondering how, it can be made, for other industries easier to look at, to learn from you, etc. But two things I perhaps would like to have some further clarification. You said something about government appreciating and giving some encouragement or something like this. That was one. And then you said about carrot and stick policy. What exactly would you like? I mean, other than perhaps even subsidies. Okay, in case of environmental, electric vehicles, etc., all over the world, I mean, they give subsidies irrespective of what the WTO says, or they do it. But that would be, by itself, it would be very difficult from government. IMF you mentioned, that's one reason, but even otherwise. Perhaps what they could have, at one time when they were trying to make, in the initial stages of ISO certification. They said, okay, from this export development fund, I will meet a certain cost and the rest. So what else you have in mind? Is it something, reduction of some tariffs on environmental goods that you use or something?
I'll just briefly answer that one. Sir, I have been a part of the EDF board for a few years with Razak sir. And I see that the funds are there, but there's nobody there to take it. So that can be one model of maybe utilizing that. And I had not thought of it before you mentioning it. But what I really meant was that, in all my 20 years of work life, we were always sold to the gimmick that, there's going to be an exporter award given by the president or blah, 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 even though it was just a paid, I think, award always given. But nobody comes up and says that there's a sustainability award, there is a sustainability recognition as well. What my point was that one, of course, is the financial side of it, where you need to encourage the subsidy part and support that. But the other side of it is, which we all as human beings are always willing to, is how we can add more attraction by encouraging the people and appreciating them and showing what good work they've done.
Thank you, Anis. I'd like to welcome Madam Aisha Mera, Secretary, Ministry of Climate Change, and also Dr. Hamid Atiq Sarwar, Member, IR Policy at FBR. Madam, we just presentation on the textile value chain, but I shared the study with you, so if you'd like to share your remarks with the audience.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I was not here when the presentation was made, but textile sector is extremely important, and it's cornerstone of Pakistan's economy, driving growth, employment and exports while offering immense potential for future development through sustainability and innovation. Pakistan's textile sector faces many challenges like energy shortages, outdated technology and limited access to finance for modernization. Additionally, environmental regulations, global competition and lack of skilled labor further hinder growth, while supply chain disruptions due to economic volatility add to operational difficulties. These challenges are exacerbated by climate change risks, including water scarcity, extreme weather events, and rising temperatures. These threats disrupt cotton production, damage infrastructure, and increase operational costs. Additionally, regulatory pressure for sustainable practices and international demand for eco-friendly products pose challenges for maintaining competitiveness in global markets. To address these concerns, Textile Value Chains Climate Investment, Adam Smith's international report highlights several constraints hindering private sector investment in climate change mitigation and adaptation within the textile value chain. These include inadequate access to green financing, weak regulatory incentives, high initial costs for sustainable technology, limited awareness and fragmented supply chains. These obstacles hinder the adoption of climate-smart practices and slow down investment flows. Unlocking private investment in the textile sector is crucial for achieving economic and environmental sustainability goals. It enables modernization, enhances resource efficiency, and supports compliance with environmental regulations. Investment in green technologies also boosts global competitiveness and drives innovation, leading to long-term economic growth and reduced environmental impact. Investment in renewable energy, enhancing energy efficiency, water conservation and waste management, sustainable sourcing practices, and adoption of circular economy principles are the key opportunities where private sector investments have significant impact. Clean regulatory frameworks to incentivize green technologies, tax incentives, subsidies, and regulatory reforms to attract private capital for sustainable incentives and aligning national policies with global climate commitment to stay competitive in international markets hold pivotal importance in uplifting the textile sector. Innovating financial solutions like concessional funding, blended finance, green bonds, collaboration with international donors and financial institutions to offer low-cost financing options and models of public-private partnership will unlock the private investment in textile businesses. Capacity building and knowledge transfer are crucial for transforming the textile industry. implementing training programs for industry stakeholders and sustainable practices and technology adoption, along with sharing best practices, is essential for driving this change. Climate smart investments can improve the global competitiveness of Pakistan's textile sector. Sustainability can bring a value proposition for attracting international buyers, especially from regions with strong environmental standards like EU and US. This report augurs well the benefit of adopting a holistic system approach for Pakistan's textile value chain, aligning it with national development plans and global sustainability trends. Sustainable textiles are not only a way to mitigate climate risk, but also a way to tap into growing global markets for environment-friendly products. The private sector can play a crucial role in advancing the transition to a climate-resilient textile value chain. Our textile business must adopt long-term sustainability strategies that align with national climate targets and global best practices. In conclusion, while I commend the Consortium for Development Policy Research for producing this valuable and timely report, I emphasize the need for robust collaboration between the private sector, government, and international partners. It is essential to overcome barriers and take collective action to unlock investments that will strengthen the resilience of Pakistan's textile sector against climate change. So this is my formal statement. And I really want to highlight the fact that Pakistan's private sector is very resilient. We have some of the companies like Interloop who have made a difference. So we want leaders like those companies to come forward, showcase their example, and be a beacon of light for rest of the sector. The sector is extremely important because 99% are SMEs. So we need financing arrangements made available in collaboration with the international partners. While we are going to COP29, we are again and again highlighting the importance that all the financing facilities which are made available to the developing countries must have, simpler processes and procedures, whether it's GCF or JEF. There is no national accreditation agency there from Pakistan. So how are we going to access funds to transform and, do the transition? On the other hand, Pakistan has been very proactive, and the commitments that we made in COP, 15% we were supposed to do from our own resources. We are on that track and we have done that. We will be presenting our third NDC soon by January 2025. But the rest of the 35% we are still looking to the development partners. And we encourage these type of research because it lays down the foundation that where the private sector needs financing arrangements, and through innovative solutions, we need to do the hand-holding of the private sector and especially the SMEs of Pakistan so that they are more climate resilient and they are able to adopt sustainability standards and can meet the goals of climate change.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for your valuable comments. We'd like to move now to the next presentation. The next study is sort of complementary because here we talk a lot about transition in the textile value chain. A major component of that is also technology, and as we know, a lot of that technology needs to be brought into the country. It's not there. So we've done another research and a policy note which talks about the trade policy measures that can actually encourage a shift towards green technologies. So I'd request Dr. Adil Nakoda from the Institute of Business Administration, Karachi, to make a short presentation on the topic, and then we'll have a similar format of discussion on the slides.
So what kind of trade policy do we need to ensure that we move towards a more greener, more sustainable, environmental friendly economy in this sense? So Pakistan has committed in various international forums to have half its projected carbon emissions by 2030. This seems like an ambitious goal because this is just about 6 years away, but we need to adopt certain measures to ensure that we become a more sustainable, environmental friendly economy in this sense. So goals include increasing the use of renewable energy as well as promoting the spread of electrical vehicles. So what does this report focus on? It basically looks on two major issues here: the tariffs and non-tariff measures involved on environmental goods, as well as we focus on some of the selected industrial policies to promote a shift towards greener activities. Our research methodology includes multiple approaches, such as we'll have a desk review of secondary literature, analysis of trade and tariff policy from various data repositories, and then we look at, we have had focus group sessions with the private sector, as well as discussions with the Ministry of Commerce. Ministry of Commerce also gave us some feedback on this report, which was indeed very helpful in rethinking some of the stuff that we have talked about. So, as a party to the Paris Agreement by the United Nations Framework Convention, Pakistan has already updated its nationally determined contributions in 2021. So, one of the things about this was that we are supposed to halve our emissions by 2030, while the mitigation actions to meet the goals include 60% of energy consumption will be sourced from renewable sources such as solar, wind, etc. 30% of the vehicle fleet that we have will consist of electrical vehicles. And we will also impose a ban on import of coal with a moratorium on new coal-powered plants. But this is interesting in itself that this does not talk about domestic coal-powered plants as those using domestic supply of coal, as well as the ones that have already been commissioned, right, but are under construction. So they will be allowed to be constructed in that sense. So the idea here again is that we are also going through a chronic balance of payment crisis. This happens every few years. And one of the things that we see, fossil fuels contributes to about 30% of our total imports. So reducing for the demand of the demand of imports of fossil fuel will result in actually alleviating a chronic balance of payment crisis as well. So that can also have this add-on benefit. We'll also tackle the environmental challenge, as well as the challenge associated with the balance of payments that leads to this crisis every few years, because we have this large surge in the imports of fuel, like we did in the last 2 years, right? 2 years ago, which led to, again, which is one of the contributing factors for a balance of payment crisis. 1 second, where's this? Sorry. This is okay. So recent studies by the World Bank and USAID offer insights into Pakistan's existing tariff structures for environmental goods. They were undertaken a few years apart. So we have these two studies, which are one was done by World Bank and the other one was done by USAID Prayer. Our own report has been based on these studies, and they basically have these list of environmental goods. We actually build up upon these environmental goods. We take our so in addition to these environmental goods, we actually looked at the environmental goods that were taken up by some other studies and commonly taken in these other studies. And we've also included the list from the IMF. So IMF also has a list of environmental goods. We have adopted that as well. So both these studies show a moderate variation between them on the tariffs that were imposed. So these studies focused on tariff rates. Our study focuses on tariff rates as well as non-tariff measures, which is not in these studies, right? Which is not included in the studies. So the average tariff by the World Bank study was 15.7%, while the one by USAID was at 11.4%. The USAID study also looked at para-tariffs, which are additional customs and regulatory duties, and found that these were higher than normal tariffs for some items. So it's interesting that Pakistan also imposes para-tariffs on the imports of environmental goods, which again raises the price of environmental goods in the domestic market. Yeah, next slide. So we have analyzed a larger set of environmental goods than that in the World Bank and USAID studies. And we have found that our tariff rates were about 11%, which is comparable to what was reported in the USAID study. Pakistan applies higher average tariffs than regional competitors, something that we have seen. The average tariff on environmental goods is actually higher than that on non-environmental goods as well. So, and what we have also found additionally is that eliminating tariffs on environmental goods could lead to an additional $2.6 billion in imports. This methodology is also used by United Nations in their studies, in which how they look at how reduction in tariff rates across countries how much trade will that lead to? How much increase in imports will that lead to? So our calculation is that if we reduce these duties to 0% on environmental goods, we will basically add $2.6 billion in imports, which is about 3-4% of our total imports. With that, so one thing was we looked at this environmental goods. There are about 300 and some environmental goods that we looked at in this study. So the first three results are highlighted by this graph. As we can see here, Pakistan has one of the highest tariff rates in the region. Our tariff rates are between, let's say, 5% and 30% on a lot of the environmental goods. The average is about 10% for non-environmental goods, while 11%, as has been highlighted before, on environmental goods. And if you look at Bangladesh, it is again similar. India has lower average tariff rates than us. It's about at 8% on environmental goods, while China and Vietnam has reduced it significantly over the years, their tariffs on environmental goods as well, and on all products. While China also has their average tariff rates on environmental goods are about 4%. One thing again is that there are about 13 products, major product categories of environmental goods that we have highlighted here. CRE is cleaner and renewable energy products such as light bulbs, etc. So a lot of these CRE products are typically domestic appliances, which again have higher tariffs imposed on them relative to other goods. So that is one thing we've seen. So here. And if we basically reduce the tariff rates on all environmental goods to 0%, as I have highlighted earlier, is the imports will go up by $2.6 billion into Pakistan, while if we reduce it to 4%, it will be something around 1.6 billion. While if we bring it to 8%, which is basically what India around, the average that India imposes on its products, then we'll have about $1.2 billion worth of imports going up. So that is something, again, this trade creation using the methodology adopted by United Nations, I've replicated that into the study. This is the average tariff rates on environmental goods in Pakistan, and as we can see here, there was a sharp drop relatively in 2016, between 2013 and 2016. So one thing that is said here is that if you look at this, between 2013 and 2016, we were in an IMF program, and at that time, it could be that electricity prices went up. There were a lot of restrictions imposed by IMF, conditions by IMF, so people moved towards renewable energy sources. So the imports of solar panel basically increased about 200% around this time between 2013 and 2016. But these were likely to be large-scale importers because at this time, during this era, we did not see residential investments in solar panels that we see today. So that was one thing different. These could be larger projects done by the government or by commercial or industrial sites at that time to move away from the more expensive non-renewable energy sources. So that is what we saw between 2013 and 2016. Then again in 2016, around that time, we saw a lot of investments coming into power plants and all that, which may have increased the tariff rate slightly again. And then in around 2020, 2021, again, we saw this shift towards solar panels, but this time it was towards residential solar panel equipment, which was basically done as a new policy that we saw towards net metering, etc. Right? So we see that in around after 2020 in this case. So the summary here again is Pakistan applies the highest average tariff rates on all environmental goods in comparison to other countries. The average tariffs applied to environmental goods by China and Vietnam are less than half of those applied by Pakistan, so that's some stark difference there. While those applied by India and Bangladesh are closer, but still lower than what we apply. We did see some decline in 2013 to 2016 as imports of solar panels increased, but later in 2020, there was another phase of investments in solar panels, and we saw that as a result, we also again saw a decline in this case. So reducing the average tariff on environmental goods to 8% applied by India would be a good move for us to start our reduction in the whole environmental goods products, right? So that would increase basically our imports by roughly $1.2 billion if we were to do that according to my calculation here. Now let's come to the non-tariff measures. Here we see that Pakistan hardly imposes non-tariff measures on the imports of environmental goods. We do not have any certification, major certification or labeling or inspection requirements that are imposed by other countries, especially by China and Vietnam, on the imports of their goods. So what we are generally seeing is a trend that countries generally in East Asia have moved away from tariffs and they are imposing non-tariff measures. Now, non-tariff measures themselves can be imposed to ensure that the consumers don't consume dangerous and substandard products, right? To avoid the imports of substandard and dangerous products, we generally see non-tariff measures being imposed. So these are technical non-tariff measures. We have non-technical non-tariff measures, which can be import bans, quotas, etc. But here I've just looked at the technical ones, and generally typically the technical non-tariff measures are imposed in order to increase the quality and the standard of goods. So that is one thing we see. And we've seen that in Pakistan is unfortunately very low. It's hardly applied. The prevalence rate, that is the percentage or the proportion of tariffs imposed on the goods, is also very low compared to China and India, where they actually impose 6 measures on the imports of a certain good, while ours is less than 1 on average, right? We hardly impose such measures. Even if we do, they are mostly on labeling and packaging requirements. While China and Vietnam does a lot of pre-shipment inspections on its imports, while China has a lot of certification and inspection requirements on their imports. Then we have India, again, which does have much higher tariff rates, right? They are converging, the non-tariff measures are converging towards that of China and Vietnam, while Bangladesh is in between, basically. It has imposed certain measures on imports of certain goods, while it hasn't on the other goods, right? But Pakistan's, as you can see, the space for Pakistan is virtually empty in this year compared to the other countries. So Pakistan reports the lowest coverage of and frequency scores for non-tariff measures. We apply very few non-tariff measures on environmental goods, but we do apply very high tariff rates in that. So the panel showing the results for Pakistan is striking for its relative emptiness compared to that of China, Vietnam, and India. While Pakistan features the lowest prevalence score, that is the percentage or the proportion of tariff rates imposed on every good, right? How many non-tariff measures do we see on the imports of certain goods? That is again very low in that sense. So NTMs are not actively applied trade policy for environmental goods in Pakistan. So in common with the World Bank and USAID studies, we recommend tariffs on a range of environmental goods, especially on electrical vehicles, energy-saving equipment, and air pollution control products, to ensure that substandard, low-quality products or products that are dangerous for health or for consumption by our consumers are not imported into the country, so that what we import, we ensure that they do have certain labelings, inspections, certification requirements. And this also is important in the sense that we do not import maybe outdated technology, right? We have seen that European Union tends to phase out a lot of products that are considered non-environmental friendly, right? In many ways, they may have CFC, etc., whatever it is. We may be lacking in that sense because we don't have measures, government standards or controls in that sense to reduce or limit those kind of goods that are imported that could be environmentally unfriendly in that sense. Pakistan could aim initially to cut its average tariff rate to 8% as compared to, as we see in India, with the intention of reducing this further over time. So the gradual reduction could happen starting with 8%, and then we could go down to 4% and eventually to 0% in that sense. So Pakistan should adopt a more active non-tariff measure policy to meet carbon emission targets, following the practices that we are seeing in East Asia as well. Now we are seeing in India as well. NTMs should be applied across a wider range of products to reduce the average carbon intensity of imports. And what we focus here is we should start with labeling and certification requirements, and then we should also impose high energy efficiency standards to align with carbon footprint reduction goals, to ensure that the vehicles that we are importing, even if we are importing non-electrical vehicles, they do meet certain standards. And those standards, NTMs, one of the things about NTMs is that if you apply it on imported goods, you by rule have to apply it on your domestic goods as well. So our domestic goods will also start meeting those standards that are expected from the imported goods. And eventually our consumers will also start demanding, once they realize that the imported goods have certain standards, they will start demanding those from domestic producers as well. And this will also ensure that we are able to export our goods, because one of the challenges our exporters face is that they produce goods of substandard qualities which are rejected by the importing countries. So once our measures, non-tariff measures, start converging towards those set by our trading partners, then it can also be easier for our exporters to meet those requirements as well. So this is one thing. So one thing that comes up is the CBAM, right? So though that is again creating a lot of challenges for our exporters. But if we start as our own policies, start ensuring that we are meeting certain standards, requirements in our production as well, that could help alleviate this concern of our exporters that our local production is not really suitable to meet the requirements of our importing countries as well, right? So that could be the thing. So now I'll recommend some of the industrial policies associated with our trade. So one is trade facilitation. There's a lot of talk about this trade facilitation agreement. So there have been studies done across different countries, and they've seen that TFA could reduce trade costs if we implement it by 15%, while efficient customs facilitation reduces paper wastage and border wait times. There have been a lot of studies done, like in developed world, where they say that electronic systems have helped reduce border wait times and also lorry wait times, which reduces emissions as well, right? So when trucks and lorries don't have to wait at the border because the processes have already been cleared, their customs have already been cleared electronically, that also helps reduce and cut their emission rates. So that's one thing that has come up, and saving paper, etc., going cross-border paperless trade does help in many ways to ensure that we reduce paper wastage, reduce the cost, the documentation cost, the time saved by the exporters and importers is also very important in this sense. Then we talk about government procurement in this sense that use of EVs in government procurement should become more common. Government itself should ensure that EVs are bought, and for whatever the employees or whatever it is, they should start with the EV trend, right? The trend picking up, they should also catch on to it. Construction of greener environment government buildings should be more greener, environmental friendly in this sense. And then specifying green targets in procurement agreements with their contractors, that should become very important, that ensure that certain contractors, they meet these goals in whenever they build buildings or whatever it is, right? They should roads, etc., that they meet certain targets that are focusing on reducing emissions. Then trade finance is also very important. Provide better terms to businesses engaged in low carbon intensity, even across industries as well as within industries. If there are certain businesses in textile that are recognized to be lower in their carbon emissions, they should be given better terms, etc., compared to other businesses. So cut financing for coal projects. Coal projects have known to be very environmental unfriendly in that sense. But promote that for renewable energy sources to push for more greener trade in this sense. So the recommendations for electrical vehicles, this is again a hot topic. EVs are projected. Now this is the National Electric Vehicle Policy that was, I think, done a few years ago, which basically targeted at about 30% of all vehicles by 2030 will be electrical vehicles in Pakistan. But this also requires lower tariff rates on batteries and accessories to promote EVs. The ancillary, the industry services, etc., need to be invested in. Private investments in EV charging stations through tax concessions and favorable credit must also be provided. We should also encourage setups in more remote areas, because if people are going to drive EVs and especially go long distance, they will need more charging stations throughout the country. And then rules and processes to promote small scale businesses using EVs. So if there are delivery companies, etc., that are adopting EVs, right, they should be encouraged to ensure that emissions reduce, as well as better registration processes for smaller EVs such as rickshaws, etc. One challenge is that the registration process tends to be pretty complex, right? So a lot of these businesses do not buy these smaller businesses may not buy EVs, etc., if they are going to face that difficulty in getting new vehicles. And then the renewable energy specific recommendations are there. So we do suggest and give this preference to naturally solar panels that are already imported duty free. Lower tariffs on ancillary items should also be given, such as steel structure, lithium batteries, circuit breakers, and inverters. We see that the tariff rates on these ancillary items tend to be very high in Pakistan. So that discourages, again, increases the cost of production. So if your solar panels become cheap, but the ancillary items associated with this setup of the solar systems are expensive, that will again discourage consumers to shift towards these investments. So we have that. Wind energy investments, again, needs to be promoted. We see, so in our report, we've highlighted that the cost of wind energy is still very high. Pakistan does import one of the cheapest solar panels in the world, but wind energy, wind generators, turbines are not the cheapest. Rather, they're one of the most expensive that we import. So that is a big difference in that. We need to ensure that even wind energy, the larger plants, that they set up wind farms across the country, if they are promoted as well, to ensure a better mix of solar and wind in our energy grid. Right? So we, to do that, we also need to make sure that we have given a lot of incentives for solar, but we also need to now start giving incentives for larger setups using wind farms. And then we need to encourage smaller micro solar and wind units through friendlier net metering policies. This should continue the net metering policies. Rather, it should become more friendlier, reduce the gap between the things so that between the price that consumers pay and the solar net metering benefits that they get. So this is the thing. And the other thing that we should also focus on is reducing resistance from competing fossil fuel-based power plants, which we generally see with the whole debate on IPPs. We need to resolve that and ensure that they also move towards more renewable energies. Fossil fuel plants are discouraged while we move towards a more renewable setup so that we can eventually meet our goals of reducing carbon emissions and ensuring a more greener environment and an economy. In that sense. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, for a quick presentation again on a very lengthy report, and I think very rightly pointing out, the scope for tariff rationalization, but also sort of really focusing on the non-tariff measures. I think my first trade research was back in 2005, and I sort of read at that time about the NTMs being or NTBs being a competitive advantage tool. And I think a lot has been written on it since then, but unfortunately, I think as we discussed in the previous session as well, that even for the textile value chain, unless we really strengthen our domestic standards and focus on that for compliance, both for local and for imports that are coming up, we're not going to upgrade the quality of the produce. So I'll start with some of our key discussants. So first, I'd like to invite Dr. Manzoor, who's who's part of the REMIT team as well, but broadly he's one of the leading trade experts in Pakistan at the moment and been working in this area for very long. He was also ambassador to WTO at one point in time. So Dr. your reflections of the presentation.
No, thank you, Usman Sahab. First, a word about the report. I think it was very clear, comprehensive, and takes account of the recent reports. I mean, it's based on those, so it's not independent. I mean, so it includes all that. So I'm quite happy with these recommendations. But what really comes out is again this tariffs everywhere. Because I mean, one of the things we've been recently, REMIT has been pushing the relevant Ministry of Commerce and FBR, etc., was that please rationalize your tariff. You're completely out of sync with the rest of the world. I mean, at least 3 times, 4 times more. But when we look at any policy, say environment policy, say IT, say agriculture, everywhere the big problem is tariffs. And this report brings out that very clearly, that our tariffs they have compared with relevant countries, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, etc., in the region, and they're much higher. And I think the second point that they bring out is that we are very lax about anybody can import anything, without any certification. I mean, someone tried to export these local fans to Sweden, and they looked at it. They said, no way these can come in this country because they consume so much electricity that there's no way that we can let this. In fact, even our own government realizes, it's been realized for a long time that In our summers, our demand goes up, our electricity goes about 10,000 higher than the winter. And one big reason is electric fans and air conditioners. And they have had this plan for many years that, okay, whatever the number of fans, we replace them. Because if we give them more environmental friendly, that money will be recovered in no time. I mean, with less energy, less electricity being used. But somehow it has. But in the meantime, while they do this or they don't do this, but at least they can enforce whatever the fan in the market. So there should be clear that A, B, C, D, or whatever, that if you buy this fan, this will consume so much electricity, so that people know, which one to buy. So there's no system at present. The next point is about, because my background, WTO negotiations, etc. And unfortunately, for the last few years, Pakistan has made a decision that wherever they are not multilateral. What it means is that recently negotiations in the last 10 years maybe of having an agreement where everyone agrees, all 164 members agree, become very difficult. So what they've done is, okay, they said coalition of the willing. Maybe it's 10 countries, 100 countries. If they agree to something, they can negotiate. Pakistan as a policy said, no, we will not do that, because unless it is the whole thing. And recently, fortunately, on investment facilitation, Prime Minister set up a committee to look at our policy, and I was a part of that committee, and I said, there's no reason if there are 140 countries negotiating something, Pakistan staying out of everything. So in that particular case, at least we agreed that Pakistan will take part, but it was also decided that for all these other things, like environment, there are at least 3 negotiations going on, three different themes on plastic pollution, sustainability, and then there's another one. And I think luckily Aisha is here. She can push. She has been at the WTO. We were, contemporary. She came just after me. But anyway, but we should take part, because through that we learn the best practices and what's happening in the rest of the world. Example is the trade facilitation agreement. Pakistan was very reluctant. No, this is not, we should not be. But at the time we pushed, and Pakistan eventually decided to. And now we have this Pakistan single window, etc. And we take it as a showpiece. And we attracted a lot of financial assistance, and that could happen, same thing could happen in this environment. And also, your people will go there, participate in there, and you read their papers, etc., make your comment. So these negotiations are extremely important. Pakistan is completely taking itself out. And I think, you're being the secretary, you can push this. I think I'll stop here, but just last final point. Adil said about wind energy plants being very expensive. And I remember someone telling me at one time, he said, we put up a plant for 100 million and we over-invoiced it by, I don't know, it was total 20 million, and we made it 100 million for various reasons, because of loans, etc., and all that. And I think in this report says that compared to the world average, we are 10 times more expensive. One can understand a little more expensive, but 10 times more expensive because it's zero duty. So there's something hanky-panky going on. Someone needs to look into it. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Sab, for eloquently making these points, and these are well noted. Next, I'll request Mr. Vikas, from a private sector perspective, and given your experience of being in renewable energy for a very long period, based on the presentation, what do you think are some of the real constraints that needs to be addressed?
Thank you very much. First of all, as I mentioned to Dr. Adil, it was a very well covered presentation. Lots of different areas which were covered. In a few minutes remark, I won't be able to address everything, obviously, but I'd like to pick up a couple of points, or 3 points, which I want to talk about. First of all, versus what I was looking at the dates of your presentation, of the research, and in the last 1 year, especially in the solar segment, things have changed very rapidly where the prices have gone down globally due to the China reason. Obviously, this is something which is in the markets as well. So where we were looking at, ROIs of 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years, now we're looking at under 2 years and even 1 year ROIs in a lot of places. So what that essentially does is that it helps us to improve our return on investment. It ties up nicely with the second point. This is something which I just wanted to emphasize, that not only is your research very important in terms of the points which it makes, but in the last 1 year, the importance has gone up significantly because the paybacks have obviously increased, and that helps us in making the case. It ties up nicely with the tariff point, Dr. Saab, Manzoor Saab, you mentioned that tariffs everywhere kind of situation. I think one of the things which we need to do as the solar industry, as the renewable industry, as the sustainable, the green industry, we need to make the case for the government because the reality is that Pakistan is not doing very well financially right now. I mean, this is an understatement, I would say. We have some issues. So obviously, at this time, going and saying that reduce the tariff, it's something which, when you go and talk to somebody in the regulators or even in the policymakers, you close the door immediately. So what we really need to do is to make the case, because if I were to look at it, if a renewable technology has a payback of 2 years, so that's like 1.5, 2 years, that means that yes, we will spend a little bit more today on the import of that, but in 2 years we will be importing less oil for the next 10 years. So effectively, it's a net positive cash flow. Yes, we have a budget issue, and yes, we have priorities. However, this is one of those priorities where the impact within 2 years is going to be very positive. So, we were talking about how in the textile sector, on the lower part of the value chain, we need to convince the smaller SME who is perhaps not very well educated on the benefit of that. Here, we need to help our government to make the case of how reducing the tariff is going to be beneficial in the long run financially. Not just because it's going to make us more green and it's going to make, obviously those benefits are all like, icing on the cake. When our kids can go to school without smog, that's something which is anyway a positive thing. However, financially, where there is a problem in whoever is setting the tariffs, we can help them to convince that. So that's the second point. I think this is an area where we can focus on, perhaps even commission a second research or something like this, where we can then create some case studies and pick up examples of how within Pakistan it could happen, and then maybe some international examples. And the third area which I want to talk about, that's more on it's on the, we talked about the policies of how net metering and wind energy and all of those need to be sustained. I think one of the things which is kind of still missing in Pakistan, it applies to EVs as well, but in general, because these are new technologies, we don't have regulations for them. So one of the big and most important things which is going to play a role in the next 4 to 5 years, maybe even earlier, is the battery, the lithium battery. Does it connect in your house? Does it connect on this side of the meter? Does it connect on that side of the meter? We've been having this discussion for a while. Most likely, I mean, again, there's no clear answers to this, and in fact, this is so cutting edge that even countries which are ahead of us are just ahead of us by 5 or 6 years, not more than that. So where does the battery go in? How do we regulate the battery? If there is a grid connection to the battery, what's the policies which are needed for that? What are the best policies happening in the other parts of the world? And in some cases, what would be the logical, because battery prices are also going, not through the roof, the other side, it's, going under the floor. We're seeing that with this, people who had invested in lithium are suffering because lithium prices are down. So that's a good thing, right? Because it helps, it shows you that there's going to be more EVs, but it most importantly shows you there's going to be lots more. So when you have this 1.5 year payback on solar, there's a lot of people who are going to put in solar. When there's a lot of people who are going to put in solar, the demand requirement during the day to the night is going to change a lot. And one of the most important bridges for this is going to be the battery. The battery needs to come at the grid level, it needs to come at the utility level, and it will come at the household or the private level as well. So I think that's another area which we can sort of focus on in terms of how we can sort of leapfrog a little bit ahead and perhaps help our green transition through something like this. So this is a few points, and we can discuss it further offline as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. Next, I'll ask Dr. Nabil, although we've had, Dr. Adil also said, a lot of discussions with the Ministry of Commerce, but, reflections on the presentation, especially again touching on the point, because this presentation, like the previous one, also talked about the standards and the link with the, the import part as well, and also the export, just to upgrade the overall value chain.
Thank you very much. It was a very comprehensive report. I've already gone through that. As far as the compliances are concerned, yes, of course, we'll be looking for the import compliances as well, and we've already got a assignment for our aluminium and CFC kind of products for this Gujarat and other sectors. So yes, of course, standards are there, but one of few things that I would like to that should be added in is that whether it's Ministry of Climate, Ministry of Commerce, or Industries, or anything, we should allow only the projects which are technology transfer projects. For the bigger players, I think anything which comes in, they need to have technology transfer which is sustainable. And it happens in UK, it happens in Sri Lanka, it happens in India and everywhere. You have to come out of the normal supply chain. Secondly, very important, whenever we make a policy, we pick up a few areas like across the supply chain. We might pick up one of the areas like, for example, energy. For example, you're talking about the chemicals disposal or anything. We need to build that throughout the supply chain and make sure that everywhere the compliance is being, there is a conformance of the compliance over there. And then if you talk about industrial sectors that have been built up, like if you travel through the motorway and all that, there is a Shivapura city, and that's the garment city that they've started building up. People have started working there. You shouldn't allow any industry to start working unless and until you have solid waste management system there, you have liquid waste management system there, and so on and so forth. Because what is going to happen next is there are consortiums coming up for the compliances, and the countries which are not, coming up with the new technology transfers and all that, the consortium will ask the bigger players or even the SMEs to buy those raw materials from the consortium they have built up, whether it's in Thailand, whether it's in UK, in States or somewhere, and you can imagine the cost of the transportation, the carbon credits that are going to be hit. So we have to encourage our big players to, and the government should only fund in those areas where there is a technology transfer, where there is something which comes up with the compliances. Otherwise, you're talking about building up the supply chain and sustainability and improving these processes. They are going to be redundant very soon because technology is on wheels now. It's not with the humans. So we have to be very careful in every field. So compliances are coming, and then the number of compliances will all, they'll become less because they'll have their checks beforehand, and because they are making sure that you have your barcodes and you are buying your raw material from the consortium they have decided to get through. So your profits, they'll be squeezing up, and then you have other challenges coming up. So we need to think a bit out of the box from what we are trying to put up on the sustainability. The only way is what is happening, we should improve it. Go way forward, have a more technology transfer, sustainable things going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nabil. Last, I'd request comments from Dr. Hamid Atiq Sarwar. He has been Additional Secretary Industries and also Member Policy IR. I think there have been some questions in terms of, the revenue impact of some of these changes as well. So, over to you for your comments.
Thank you, Usman, and thank you for the authors of this study. It's a very good document prepared by CDPR. But nevertheless, I'd like to bring something, the government angle as well as the private sector angle into it. Although it appears so from the paper that we have not made major headway in this environmental goods thing and climate improvement. But a WWF study, the World Wildlife Fund study of 2018, showed that our major pollutants, so-called, are not our industry people. Their footprint was almost 4 to 5% only. The rest of it was coming from our electricity production methods as well as from the vehicular emissions. And obviously then the use of polythene bags and everything was coming into it. So from the government point of view, we can say that our real challenges were that how to convert energy into our energy production mechanisms into some environmental friendly procedure. The second challenge was what to do about the vehicular emissions. And obviously third was what to do about polythene bags. Government, because of, as earlier pointed out, of the current account problems and everything else you see, we imported $80.5 billion was our import in 2022 June. And in the very next year, we dropped down to 53 billion, and this year, $54 billion. There was some price decrease of petroleum products in it, but nevertheless, it was majorly affected by the current account problem that we were facing. And this year's projection is only 16% that we have for imports. So we will not be touching the number that we touched in 21, 22, maybe in next 2 or 3 years. So those problems actually go into this tariff issue. But I'll request the authors to look at it from another point of view, which is that if you say that a tariff on some good is 10%, you need to add other things which we collect at import stage. So there is an 18% sales tax which goes into it, makes it 28. Then if the importer does not want to remain in the value chain, he pays another 3%, that makes it 31%. And then there is a 6% income tax on top of it, which takes it to 40%. So what has happened is that in many of these environmental goods, the income tax and sales tax have been slashed down to 0 or 1. So when you look at the effective tariff rates, including the sales tax and income tax collected at imports, actually we compare, our tariffs go lower than India and Bangladesh. If you only are looking at the tariff headings in the custom tariff, you will notice that this is too much. But at one point of time, I remember when I was in industries, in 3 months' time, when we announced this electric vehicle policy, which was along with GDP written by me, there were import of 300 e-trons in Pakistan. And its price went down. Now it is at, I think, 3 to 4 crores of rupees. And at that time, it was less than a crore rupees or 10 million rupees import. So this was something which necessitated a 10% extra custom duty on it. We added that on it, and probably last year we also increased further duties, because what happens is that our initial proposals were, and the USAID study was telling us that by 2030, we can only move into EV arena of two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which were the most beneficial thing for Pakistan, which should have happened. But unfortunately, things went the other way, and people used this, or maybe some crony capitalism was in play, and a lot of e-tron imports. Next year, it was 720. I think now the number of Audi e-trons is about 2,000 plus in Pakistan. So what we needed were 50 kVH equivalent vehicles import, which luckily now the Chinese company is coming up with a cheaper sort of and long haul sort of solution, and those cars will be hopefully available in next 6 to 12 months. So our policy was well thought out, but it was somehow because of, I think, it was the objective was not that we should import e-trons, although it has some advantage in the sense that when rich people import these EVs, there is automatic building of market of these charging stations. So this logic was presented at that time also, but because of the current account problem, we shifted away from it. But nevertheless, we also allowed a hybrid car zero rating of custom duties as well as other taxes, which I don't find mentioned in this report, because we thought that in four-wheelers we might not be able to shift directly to EVs, and in the medium to short term, which was 21-25 policy, with 21-26 policy, we thought it proper to add this. And now you can see both Toyota and Honda have this hybrid locally manufactured or assembled, whatever you can say. There were 8 parts which were different from rest of the vehicles, which we allowed at zero rating into these sectors. Again, that also needed to be counted into, while one may say that these are not purely environmental goods, but they are environmental goods in the sense that if your ordinary vehicles are doing 10 kilometers per liter, these are doing 20 to 25 kilometers per liter, and emissions naturally are reduced. On the two-wheelers and three-wheelers, we have already, EDB has a registration of 30 motor vehicle registration, and the e-bikes and other things are already, you can see them on the roads that are happening. So a lot of good things have happened in the sector of EV, and we're expecting movement towards, this is not government doing, 1 or 2 things might be done by the 21-26 policy, but market is itself responding to these incentives, and we have now a fairly large number of players which can actually replace these combustion engines with either the hybrid or EV technologies very soon. Last year in SASC, September, I remember, we tried to shift this thing. There was a solar panel scandal at that time from China. It was overvalued, over-invoiced, and we did some investigation in FBR about that. And after that, we shifted that since we are the 3rd largest importers of solar, Vietnam, USA, and Pakistan is 3rd largest importer. The shipments coming to Pakistan of the solar cells as well as other things, Pakistan stands at the top of the list. So we, SAFC, decided to encourage manufacturing of solar cells, manufacturing of batteries, and manufacturing of inverters in Pakistan. And all of them have been zero rated in this recent Finance Act. And again, I don't find, maybe I have not read this report very closely, but that should also start appearing in this report, that what have we done. And we're now trying that if so much of consumption is here of the renewable energy, why these companies cannot shift to Pakistan and start manufacturing these solar cells over here, or the panels over here, rather than we importing them all. And I was looking at the list of people you've consulted. Maybe you should add 3 or more companies which are actually now trying to establish these manufacturing units here. From 2013 to 23, June, we supported this. Total exemption was given for these solar setup companies, and that was appearing in the graph also, although it appeared that it was only for 2013 to 16, because the Qaida solar park that the Punjab government did, and its imports are appearing at that time. But nevertheless, up till 23, and because of the recent IMF agreement, we had to remove that and to add a sunset clause to it. But all the equipment related to this was zero rated. No tax was applied. And I think 3 or 4 companies including Zonergy, have done something on that, and they've used that facility, the 65G clause of this. Again, in income tax, again, we have an exemption of solar. That is why you see now all the shellers have shifted to solar. And now I was amazed to hear that the steel melting units are using solar. This is huge because steel melts at 1350 degrees centigrade. And we thought that only the arc furnaces can do that thing. But somehow people have, the market have responded to these incentives. And now they are into the smelting of steel. And now government is facing another problem, which is that we have invested a lot in this take or pay model, IPPs, and because of that, we are bound to give them their cost of investment and return on investment back up until at least 2029, when the last Chinese unit, 10 years from the last unit was took their financial close. And hence, we are now faced with this excessive sort of supply situation, and the demand, especially on the domestic side, is decreasing, and as well as there is a 30% industrial demand in decrease in major cities, LESCO, FESCO, K Electric, and again, only 10% can be attributed to the shutting down of factories. The rest of the 20% have shifted to solar thing. So without government being involved in that thing, the private sector, because of the high power tariff, in fact automatically shifting to the solar sort of thing, and that is creating huge demand for renewable energy. And the government problem is that its net metering and other things will come into question at some point of time when the cost of energy per person who is using actually this grid stations and wired energy that we produce will go higher and higher, and we are trying to balance this act somehow, that up till at least 2029 we need to keep a balance, that our domestic and industrial demand does not go below that threshold, that the people who are paying for electricity start facing a prohibitive sort of tariff. So I think again that the market in Pakistan is automatically shifting to this environment friendly thing, production of energy, as well as the vehicular thing. What we cannot do anything about is the imported pollution which is coming from India and maybe China, I don't know. We are a major recipient of this sort of unwanted import of this pollution, and probably some global forum should think about it. And again, on the last thing on polythene, Pakistan, the major cities now have this textile woven bags. You can go to Al Fatah and Jalal Sons of the country and see that. And it started from Islamabad, but the consumption in plastics is going down. We will also add some non-tariff barriers on the plastic waste which was coming into Pakistan. And we are looking at imposing further tariffs on other wastes that are coming to Pakistan. So it may not be all government's doing, but government has done some, taken some good steps over this past 2, 3, 4 years. And the response of market is showing that we'll be hopefully be better off than our neighboring countries in environmental steps. Thank you much.
Thank you, Dr. We'll open up for questions, but Madam Aisha had some comments on the EV.
Thank you very much. I think Atiq Saab has already covered a lot of the areas. I just want to highlight the fact that on EVs, 2-3 days ago, Prime Minister also took a meeting, and Ministry of Industry is also revamping the policy in collaboration with the Climate Change Ministry, and government is also planning some incentives for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. So I think market is responding a lot to this demand. Not just in EV, on a solar side as well. And we are definitely almost close to 15% of the energy coming from renewable. That I think itself is a positive sign. We are actually doing a new study to do the more in-depth analysis, but keeping in view the kind of import we are having of solar panels, and we are now getting in touch with NEPRA to get the data through the net metering, that how much is coming, so that we are more precise. But the preliminary analysis that we have done, we are close to 13 to 15%, which is renewable at the moment. And it will continue to increase. One thing that I really want to highlight is that technology transfer was mentioned. So this is very much on the radar of the Climate Change Ministry. It is also one of the streams of COP negotiations. It does not attract much attention, but developing countries are putting a lot of emphasis on that. So within that track of negotiation, there is a lot of emphasis on the adoption of new tech. For example, generative AI, robotics, and these things are going into all types of mitigation, adaptation, and even engagement with the communities is happening through generative AI. We have solutions in Pakistan where they are developing answers to the problems for people who are caught in a disaster situation. So we are creating a green tech hub. The objective is that this forum will be led by the private sector. We are having its first webinar on 22nd at 9 p.m. because we also want to encourage some of the diaspora to be part of it. So the objective of creating this green tech hub is to tell the world, and we will launch it in COP29, so that world gets to know that Pakistan is not just is one of the 10 who are facing the climate impact, and we are the most vulnerable. We are not just the most vulnerable, we are the most resilient nation as well, and we are the problem solvers. So Green Tech Hub is private sector led initiative which will be launched in COP29 with a view to ensure that private sector also get an opportunity to get a benefit of whatever is happening in the world. We must showcase some of our tech companies who are providing solutions, not just in Pakistan but across the world. We have a startup who is providing services to Boeing for reducing their emissions. So there are several tech companies who have been able to solve problems not just in Pakistan, but they are solving global problems. So we want to showcase that side of Pakistan as well, and then pitch for transfer of technology, that we are the problem solvers. So let's work together and ensure that the technology is available to rest of the world. So I think this is a very important aspect for us in terms of pitching our, positioning and narrative as problem solver. I also want to inform that CDA is doing very good work on the transport transition. They are doing a massive study in collaboration with Asian Development Bank for the whole transition of Islamabad. 100 EV buses have already reached Islamabad. They are already running on 2 routes. So a lot of good work is happening. Similarly, Asian Development Bank has also done a study of complete transition of the energy sector in Pakistan, and the cost is $101 billion. So those type of studies and calculations have been done. We are looking forward to COP, where the main theme is climate finance. So Pakistan is fully committed to transformation and transit, but obviously we do want developed countries to come forward, and in our view, it's not a natural disaster, it's a man-made disaster. So those who have done it also have to pay the price for it. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, and thank you for highlighting the upcoming EV policy, and REMIT hopefully will be supporting Ministry of Industries and yourself in developing that and updating these. If not, then I'd request Ahmed Yaqub. Ji, sorry. Sure.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I think that the initiative for this COP29 green tech kind of thing is lovely, and I wish you the best. I hope, inshallah, it goes well. Specifically about, when the policy making is being done for the EVs, I think these NTMs which were mentioned and where I think we have a clear lack, we should be able to use them. I'll give you a couple of examples. For example, solar panels. We have this huge import in Pakistan, has now become the third or fourth, but some of it is dumping. China is dumping their product onto us, substandard, sub-quality, and we don't have any good regulations to fix that, and that really starkly falls under the NTM mechanism. Panel prices have gone down. Similarly, lithium prices will go down. So we need to get these things. There's a storm coming. We need to regulate very quickly, because if we don't, the private sector, not the private sector, the people, they will just do it. Today, if you go to the village, you see the tire repair shop. The guy opens his shop and he takes out a solar panels and he puts it there. He doesn't care कि वो solar panel कहाँ से आया था. Is it B grade or C grade or D grade, or is there insurance on it or not? So there is a demand for that kind of a product by people who are not aware. So we need to put in place the NTMs which will help us to improve the quality of our industry. Similarly, the example Dr. Saab gave about the e-trons, that policy was not meant for those 700 or 2000 e-trons. What we really need is the Suzuki Wagon-R, the cream car, that needs to go on EV. And whatever policy we make in the new EV policy, and hopefully REMIT helps on this as well, the ground realities or the future implications of these things need to be put in place, where we can then make the policy such that they eventually lead to the result which we want to get. We don't want e-trons which are electric, double tax them. It doesn't matter whether they're electric or not. Where it really helps is if the rickshaw is e-rickshaw. That's where the real positive impacts will come on Pakistan, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas, for raising that. And I think the point from China is also very relevant. I mean, I think they've created an overcapacity of solar, so they can probably dump it across the globe and still have spare capacity left over. So I request now Ahmed Yaqub Sahab for closing before lunch.
Thank you, Usman. Thank you, everybody. It was both the reports and the ensuing discussions were very insightful. There were so many things that I learned today. I think there were several takeaways from the discussion as well. And as Secretary Ministry of Climate Change pointed out, there's so much happening in the country, and which is not presented in a manner which displays what we are doing as a country, as a people. So the whole narrative needs to be kind of rebuilt, where we can also display the efforts we are doing in the transition to greener technology, as well as in improving the climate overall. REMIT is happy to play a small role in leading this discussion and helping craft a policy or a narrative which helps Pakistan integrate into these discussions and helps industry and private sector take part in the global value chains. There's a lot that the government and the private sector both need to do, but it's really in partnership that we will achieve the objective. But again, this is not the end. This is one step forward. Hopefully, there'll be several more discussions, and we'll have policy outcomes in these discussions, and suggest to government what should be done in a cohesive manner by each ministry, so that there's a overall game plan visible to everybody. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Ibrar and Dr. Adil for very incisive and insightful research. Thank you very much, sirs. And I also should thank the discussants for detailed discussion today, very informative, starting with Aisha, Secretary, Ministry of Climate Change, Amreen, Additional Secretary, Ministry, Board of Investment, Hamid Atiq Sarwar, member FBR, Anis Khwaja Saab, he's left, Waqas Saab, Dr. Manzoor, and Ahmed Shafi, who also joined us online, and all of the other participants for actively participating in this workshop. Thank you very much, and in the end, CDPR for thank CDPR for all the effort and also for organizing this workshop. So thank you very much, and please join us for lunch. I think it's served outside the hall. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.